Court of Common Pleas in Mobius, Ohio, is open pursuant to adjournment. All having business before this honorable court, draw near, give attention, and you shall be heard.
Seated, please.
Will all witnesses and parties who are to give testimony in these proceedings step to the front of the court. Please raise your right hand. You solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and that your testimony will comply with the rules of the Ohio mock trial competition.
I do.
You may be seated.
We are here to hear the case of State of Ohio versus Chris Blake, and I would like to begin by introducing the court. I'll start on my far right, which is your left. First judge to be introduced is Reginald Jackson, Jr., who is the president of the Ohio State Bar Association, one of the sponsors of the mock trial program in Ohio. Next to him is Terry Lynn Smiles, who's the chair of the Ohio Mock Trial Case Committee, which is the committee, of course, that prepared the case that has been the case this year. Next to me is Richard Dove, who is an assistant in the Ohio Supreme Court, a very important assistant to me, and also, more importantly, the president of the OCLRE Board of Trustees. And on my immediate left is Judge Michael Fain, who is the judge of the 2nd District Court of Appeals, which sits in Dayton and elsewhere around Dayton. Next to Judge Fain is Julia Davis, who is a lawyer with Voorhees, Sater, Seymour, and Pease here in Columbus, and she represents the ACLU, also a sponsor of, been a longtime sponsor of the mock trial program. And finally, David Gormley, who is representing Betty Montgomery, the Attorney General. Attorney General's office has also been a longtime supporter of the mock trial program. Counsel for plaintiffs, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Counsel for defendant?
Yes, Your Honor.
Witnesses have been sworn, I believe. Yes. Okay, plaintiffs, you may begin with your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. And ready to proceed?
Yes.
Your Honors, opposing counsel, before I begin my opening statement, I would first like to introduce my team. My name is Judy Hsu, and I, as well as my co-counsel, Andrew McCarthy, are here today as representatives for the state of Ohio. Today we'll be presenting 2 witnesses, one Dr. Frida Young, portrayed by Sarah Zacharias, and one Officer Popovich, portrayed by Bethany Holton. Your Honors, opposing counsel, may it please the court. The strength of this country resides with its ability to uphold certain constitutional guarantees. Among these guarantees is our right to not be subjected to unreasonable searches and seizures. We, as representatives of the state, take it very seriously when such guarantees are jeopardized, and that is why we are here today. On the evening of May 19, 2000, defendant Chris Blake was arrested for possession of illegal substances and drug trafficking. Despite the fact that the defendant herself admits to the crime, she now wants the evidence to be suppressed. Why? Because the defense alleges that the marijuana found in Blake's possession was discovered as the result of an unlawful search and seizure. But as the evidence will prove today, this is entirely not the case. That evening, just outside a high school baseball game, there were 2 police details operating independently of each other. The first of these details was a unit in charge of directing traffic out of the parking lot. The second detail was a sobriety checkpoint located several hundred yards down the road. At the conclusion of the game, departing vehicles would approach the parking lot exit, where they would subsequently face Officer Lee Klein. Officer Klein's job was to direct cars either to the left or to the right. There was roughly a 50% chance that any given car would be turned in either direction. Those who happened to be directed to the sobriety checkpoint would be directed to the sobriety checkpoint. Having attended the ball game, the defendant's vehicle was one of those leaving the ballpark. As Blake approached the parking lot exit, Klein directed him to turn to the right towards the sobriety checkpoint. One of the officers operating the checkpoint that evening was Officer Michelle Popovich. Officer Popovich will describe how Blake's vehicle caught her attention through a series of suspicious events. The first of these events being how the defendant suddenly pulled to the shoulder of the road, allowing a passenger to exit the vehicle and flee in the opposite direction of the checkpoint. Eyewitness to the events that evening, Dr. Frida Young, will verify this. Officer Popovich will then describe the suspicious seating arrangement of Blake's vehicle, as well as an overpowering scent of mint on the breath of the defendant. This scent of mint, as Popovich will explain, is a tactic that is often used to mask the odor of alcohol. At this point, Officer Popovich then noticed a passenger reaching for a bag resting in the front seat. Her attention drawn to the bag, Popovich became aware of plastic rings, similar to those that might link beer cans. This, in addition to the fleeing passenger, the peculiar seating arrangement, the scent of the mint, and the apparent weight of the bag, gave Officer Popovich enough probable cause to investigate. But as Officer Popovich asked permission to see the bag, she suddenly heard the word gun uttered in conjunction with the passenger reaching for it. Now with the suspicion that there might be both alcohol and a concealed weapon, Popovich ordered that the passenger drop the bag. She then seized and searched through it, wherein she found a bag of marijuana that Chris Blake herself admits to owning. It should be brought to the court's attention that according to defense's motion to suppress, it is contended that the actions of Officer Klein earlier in the evening were driven by purposes other than to determine sobriety. They claim that Officer Klein utilized a criminal profile to label a passenger in Blake's vehicle, Brett Parkland, as a juvenile petty theft offender. But, as your honors will see, the evidence clearly contradicts this contention. It will clearly show that Officer Klein made absolutely no contact that evening with Officer Popovich, making any pretextual reasoning immaterial to this case. But in light of the defense's motion to suppress, prosecution will address the issue through the testimony of Dr. Frida Young, who possesses an extensive educational background in criminal profiling, as well as the testimony of Officer Michelle Popovich. Your honors, by the end of this hearing, prosecution will have proven by preponderance of the evidence that the search and seizure conducted the evening of May 19th was lawful, therefore making any evidence found through this search and seizure admissible. We therefore respectfully request that the defense's motion to suppress be denied. Thank you, your honors.
Thank you, Ms. Shue. Counsel for defendant, do you wish to make an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Before I begin, I'd like to introduce my team. My name is Sandra Moon, and I'm joined today by my co-counsel, Jonathan Myron. Andrea Kendall will be playing the role of Frida Young, and Michelle Lipstick will be playing the role of Brett Parkland. And we represent the defendant, Chris Blake, a student at Mobius High School. May it please the court. The protection against unreasonable search and seizure is an essential constitutional right afforded to all Americans through the 4th and 14th Amendments. It protects individuals from overzealous police officers and their intent on labeling individuals as guilty based on the color of their skin. And it also protects citizens from police officers who conduct searches based on mere hunches rather than reasonable and articulable facts. In today's hearing, the defense asked this court to suppress the marijuana found in Chris Blake's backpack because it was the fruit of an unreasonable and illegal search. Although we have no burden, we will call 2 witnesses, Sky Blue, a professor of sociology at Moortown University, and Brett Parkland, a student at Mobius High School. Through the testimony of both the defense witnesses as well as the state's own witnesses, you will learn that on the night of May 19th, 2000, Chris Blake's vehicle was improperly directed towards a sobriety checkpoint where he was detained and his belongings illegally searched. Now that evening, Officer Klein had sole responsibility of directing traffic that was leaving a Mobius High School baseball game. But without any warning, he directed a car of unsuspecting youths towards a sobriety checkpoint, knowing they'd be stopped and questioned. But Officer Popovich didn't choose their car randomly because of the flow of traffic. The traffic had cleared to the left, but he directed that car to the right because he felt that Brett Parkland, who was in the car, fit the racially based profile of a petty theft criminal. Now, Officer Klein had no evidence to support his suspicion that Brett Parkland nor anybody in the car had committed the thefts reported earlier that evening, but he still directed that car to the right, which led to the illegal seizure of Chris Blake's vehicle. And now, not only was Officer Klein's suspicion wrong from the outset, But as you'll hear from Professor Blue, the very profile used on Brett Parkland that evening was inherently flawed, ill-conceived, and racially biased. Now you'll also hear from Professor Blue as well as Brett Parkland that after the students arrived at the checkpoint, Chris Blake was confronted by Officer Popovich, who began asking him numerous questions. Now Chris Blake stated that he had not been drinking, and there is also no indication to show that alcohol was present that evening. As the car approached the sobriety checkpoint, there was no swerving in his vehicle. As Officer Popovich began asking Chris questions, he wasn't slurring his speech. There's no bloodshot eyes, no erratic hand movements, no behavioral indications to prove that the driver nor anyone in the car had been drinking that evening. And even after Officer Popovich asked Chris the questions, he just stood there. And while she stood there, she didn't give any directions to any of the other youths in the car as to their conversation, movement, or behavior during the checkpoint. Instead, when Lauren Chambliss reached for a backpack slowly from the front seat to call her mother because the checkpoint was taking so long, Officer Popovich overreacted. She put her hand on the gun and yelled at Lauren Chambliss. Without consent, she grabbed that backpack out of the car. And without consent, she searched its contents. And she only stopped when she found something that she could use to make an arrest. In the end, the defense will show that first, Officer Klein intentionally directed Chris Blake's vehicle towards the sobriety checkpoint in the evening question. And second, that Officer Popovich did not have probable cause to search the backpack. Officer Popovich acted on a mere hunch rather than reasonable and articulable facts. Now, these actions individually and collectively constitute violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments. And it's for these reasons that we ask this court to suppress the evidence found, as it was the fruit of an unreasonable and illegal search. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moon. If you may call your first witness.
Prosecution would like to call Frida Young. Is the bench ready to proceed? For the record, would you please state your name and occupation?
My name is Frida Young, and I'm a guidance counselor from Mobius High School.
And what sort of training have you received in order to prepare yourself for guidance counseling?
I received my PhD in youth psychology from Moortown University, and while I was there, I was involved in a joint degree program between the psychology and education departments.
Now, how well have you been prepared in these fields?
I feel that my training has qualified me for my current career, since I was there for 4 years to earn my undergraduate degree, 2 more years for my master's, and then 4 additional years for my PhD.
And this would be a total of how many years?
10 years.
Now, doctor, for your PhD, did you have to write a doctoral thesis?
Yes, I did.
And what was the topic of this thesis?
Acting out the behaviors in at-risk youths.
And just to clarify for the court, what exactly is an at-risk youth?
They are the individuals who are more likely to give in to the temptation of committing a crime, such as theft, underage consumption, and possession.
Now, for your thesis, how did you obtain your research?
I took several courses that explored the techniques and methodologies of a method called profiling, both in the criminal context as well as the context of identifying at-risk youths. Then I formed my own profile based on my research and statistical data.
And how was your profile received?
My peers found it to be quite valid.
Who exactly are your peers?
They are the individuals who attended the same conferences and courses on profiling that I did.
Now, Dr. Young, have you had any other experience dealing with the subject of criminal profiling?
Yes, I've worked alongside the Mobius Police Department in helping them develop their own profiling system.
How exactly did you help them?
They asked for my services, and so I went to their station and gave a seminar on profiling and profiling techniques. And then after their profile was made, I checked it over for accuracy.
And how long ago was this?
About 6 months ago.
Your Honors, based on Ms. Young's extensive educational background as well as her recent involvement with the Mobius Police Department in the development of their profile, we would now like to qualify her as an expert in profiling.
Counsel, have any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
Okay.
Thank
Should
you,
be
Your
called.
Doctor, how is a profile typically formulated?
In order to develop a profile, one would have to gather the characteristics of individuals who have been caught and found guilty of the crime that the profile is attempting to identify. Then the commonly occurring traits such as background, physical appearance, and the nature of their habits are determined.
Now, doctor, given your expert opinion, how effective of a practice is profiling?
I feel that profiling is very effective. The government has used it for years to identify drug traffickers, serial killers, custom violators, etc., although it needs to be applied correctly.
And how would a profile be applied correctly?
Well, not all characteristics will be present at the same time. It only takes a majority of the characteristics to be present in order to render a suspicion.
Also, given your expert knowledge, how accurate is profiling?
Again, profiling is very accurate.
How so?
If a police force is aware of a profile, they can help individuals who fit that profile stay out of trouble. Research has proved this.
Now, let's draw our attention to the evening in question. Where were you the evening of May 19th?
I was in attendance at the Mobius versus Moortown baseball game.
And did anything happen at this baseball game?
Yes, Chris Blake was arrested afterwards.
Now, were you present at the time of the arrest?
Yes, I was.
Would you please tell the court what happened immediately following the game?
Actually, I left the game early in order to avoid the traffic. As I was leaving, I noticed that Officer Lee Klein was present, and we're good friends, so I stopped to talk with him.
And how exactly are you acquainted with Officer Klein?
Officer Klein is employed by the Mobius Police Department, and we met while I was there giving my seminar on profiling. He caught me afterwards and expressed his interest in that area, and so we've gotten together on several occasions to discuss the subject.
Going back to profiling, was the same methodology applied that you described earlier in the Mobius' development of their profile?
Yes, of course.
And what was the type of criminal that the Mobius Police Department was trying to identify?
They were attempting to identify potential juvenile petty theft offenders.
And ultimately, what type of characteristics did the Mobius Police Department come up with that were of these types of offenders?
They concluded that youths who were from a low-income family, were of a single-parent or foster care household, who were of a non-majority ethnic race, who displayed a deviant appearance, had a prior conflict with peers, and poor school performance, could be potential offenders.
Just to clarify, is this profile based solely on race?
No, it's not.
Now, did this profile also resemble any other profile that you are aware of?
Actually, it's very similar to my profile for the at-risk youth.
Going back to the night in question, what happened following, or what was the subject of your discussion with Officer Klein?
I learned from Officer Klein that there had been several cell phone thefts from the parking lot that evening, and then we discussed the possibility of using profiling in order to identify a suspect.
Now, what occurred following your conversation with Officer Klein?
The game let out, and so he went to his post to start getting ready to direct the traffic, and I got into my car. As I was getting ready to pull away, I noticed that Chris Blake's convertible pulled up and the top was down.
Who was in this vehicle?
Chris Blake, and sitting next to her was Alex Nesbitt, in the back seat was Lauren Chambliss and Brett Parkland.
And what did you learn about this particular vehicle that night?
I learned from Officer Klein that Brett fit the profile for the at-risk youth, and also the potential juvenile petty theft offender.
Just to clarify, who fit this profile?
Brett Parkland.
And how does Brett fit this profile?
Brett comes from a low-income family. His mother's a single parent. He is of a non-majority ethnic race. He displays a deviant appearance, and he's had a prior conflict with peers.
And how are you able to know this?
Since I am Brett's guidance counselor at Mobius High School, I've gotten to know him very well over the past year.
Now, after you noticed that Brett Parkland did fit the profile, what happened?
Officer Klein started to redirect the traffic, and my car, along with Chris's, was directed towards the right, where I was later informed there was a sobriety checkpoint.
When exactly did you find out about this checkpoint, Ms. Young?
I learned of the checkpoint after he already directed the convertible.
Now, to the best of your knowledge, did Officer Klein have any communication with the checkpoint?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Now, did Chris Blake's vehicle go through this checkpoint?
Yes, it did.
And did yours go through it as well?
Yes, I did. Every car that was directed towards the right had to go through this checkpoint.
Now, Ms. Young, were you able, if at all, to observe the events going around Chris Blake's vehicle?
Yes, I was. Prior to the checkpoint, I was directly behind Chris's convertible, and then when we arrived at the checkpoint, I was alongside in an adjacent lane.
What were you able to witness before you or Chris Blake arrived at the checkpoint?
Actually, about 100 yards before the checkpoint, Chris's convertible stopped, and Alex Nesbitt got out of the passenger seat and started walking in the opposite direction.
Did anybody pursue Alex Nesbitt?
No, they did not. He just got up and left.
Now, what did you witness after Alex Nesbitt ran off?
We pulled up to the checkpoint, and again, I pulled alongside Chris's convertible in the adjacent lane, and Officer Popovich approached Chris's convertible and started to question him.
Did anything happen while Chris Blake was being questioned?
Yes, actually. Somebody in the back seat, I believe it was Lauren Chambliss, reached over the seat for a book bag in the front seat.
How did the officer respond?
She told Lauren Chambliss to drop the bag, and then asked if it contained any alcohol.
How did the youth respond?
The youth consented and dropped the bag, and then Chris Blake shook his head no when asked whether the backpack contained any alcohol.
And what did the officer do then?
She seized the book bag and proceeded to go through its contents.
And what did the officer find?
She found a book, some cans of soda, some cell phones, and a bag of marijuana.
Now, what happened immediately following the discovery?
Chris Blake claimed the marijuana.
And what did the officer do then?
She proceeded to read Chris's rights, arrest him for possession of an illegal substance and drug trafficking.
Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Counsel for defendant, you have cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Jolie Myring, and I'll be asking you a few questions today on behalf of the defendant, Chris Blake. You support a racially biased profile, don't you?
No, I do not.
Do you support the Mobius Police Department profile?
Yes, I do.
And an element of that is race?
It's just one of the elements.
An element is race?
Yes, it is.
And ethnic origin?
Yes, it is.
But by using these elements, you cannot guarantee that a person fitting this profile will commit a crime, can you?
No.
And you've even said that not everyone who fits a profile, the profile, will commit a crime.
No, they will not.
And of course, people who do not fit the profile do commit crimes.
That is true.
And would you agree that you believe your profile is valid?
My profile is very valid.
And it doesn't include race.
No, it doesn't.
And it doesn't include ethnic origin.
No, it doesn't.
Yet, profiling was used to predetermine what vehicles would go to the checkpoint that evening, wasn't it?
I'm sorry?
The evening of May 19th, profiling was used to predetermine which vehicles would go to the checkpoint, wasn't it?
Objection, Your Honor. This calls for speculation.
Your Honor, permission to respond?
Yes, certainly.
This is based upon her observations that evening. She had a chance to talk with Officer Klein, and as I will show, as a result of what he told her that evening, she has this information.
She can answer the question if she knows. If not, of course, the proper answer is I don't know. Objections overruled at this time.
Officer Klein and I discussed that Brett fit the profile, but as to whether he sent the car to the right because of that, I have no idea.
You were talking with Officer Klein, correct?
Yes, I was.
And he mentioned that Brett fit the profile.
Yes, he did.
And then, and you agreed?
Yes, I'd be lying if I said that Brett did not fit the profile.
And immediately after that, he sent the Blake vehicle to the east.
Yes, he did. I do not know whether he sent it to the right because of the profiling, though.
And you agreed that Brett fit the profile, even though you think he's a good enough student to receive a scholarship.
I feel that Brett does fit the profile, even though I feel that I've been successful in helping him stay out of trouble. I cannot deny the fact
Do
that
you
he
feel
fits the
that he's a
profile.
good enough student to receive a scholarship?
Most definitely.
And he has an A- average.
Yes, he does.
And you've even said that you've been very successful in providing support and guidance for Brett.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevancy.
This goes to, one of the elements is a student's grades, and she's provided him help with his grades, and I'm just trying to show that he does not fit the profile in this stance.
Objections overruled.
Your Honor.
Would you like me to repeat the
Yes,
question?
please repeat the question.
You've said that you've been very successful in providing support and guidance to Brett.
Yes, I feel I've been very successful.
All right, now let's turn to the night in question. Now, when the Blake vehicle was stopped by Officer Klein, both directions began to clear, correct?
Yes, they did.
And the Blake vehicle was directed to the east.
Yes, it was.
And this was after Officer Klein had told you that Brett fit the petty theft profile.
Yes, it was.
And the Blake vehicle had no choice but to go to the east as Officer Klein directed them,
No, nobody had a choice that evening.
which, as you learned, was towards a checkpoint.
I learned after he directed the convertible, yes.
Because Klein told you, correct?
Yes, he did.
But he didn't tell Chris Blake, did he?
No, he did not.
And as you followed the Blake vehicle, you didn't see it swerve.
I did not follow. I was directed that way, but when I was behind the convertible, no, it did not swerve.
You didn't see any sign of intoxication, did you?
No, not to
Your Honor. Motion to strike. This calls for speculation as well as improper opinion. Dr. Young is not trained to know what exactly constitutes a driver under the influence.
Your Honor, this is based upon her observation. She was driving behind the vehicle. A person of common knowledge would know what happens when a person is intoxicated while driving, such as the swerving of the vehicle.
Well, I think what I'm hearing so far is she's testifying to what she saw, not giving an opinion as to whether somebody was intoxicated. So at this point, you may continue the questioning.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You never saw any sign of intoxication, did you?
No, not to my knowledge.
And once you arrived at the checkpoint, you didn't hear the specifics of the conversation between Chris Blake and Officer Popovich when he first walked up to the car?
No, I did not.
And you never heard the officer tell the passengers in the vehicle not to move?
No, I didn't.
And once Lauren Chambliss reached for the backpack, the officer had a chance to tell her to drop the bag, correct?
And she did.
And he was told there was no beer in it?
Right, that's right.
And the officer took the backpack anyway?
Yes, she did for her own reasons.
And you never heard him ask Chris Blake for consent?
No, I did not.
In fact, you never heard him ask anyone in the car for consent, did you?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Shu, do you wish to redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Is the bench ready to proceed?
Yes.
Dr. Young, on cross-examination, opposing counsel brought up the issue of the differences between your profile for an at-risk youth as well as the Mobius profile for a petty theft offender. Now, is either profile based solely on race?
No, they are not. Race is only one of the elements.
And also, could you explain why your profile for an at-risk youth would be different than the Mobius's profile?
Yes, my profile for the at-risk youth is just to give us like an idea of who would be more likely to commit these crimes and be subject to causing trouble. The profile for the petty theft is just Mobius's profile for someone who would commit petty crimes.
Do you know why Officer Klein directed Chris Blake to the right?
No, I do not.
Did anybody have a choice as to how to turn?
Nobody had a choice that evening. It was solely up to Officer Klein.
And just to clarify for the court, do you fit the profile of a juvenile petty theft offender?
No, I do not.
And were you turned to the right?
Yes, I was.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Hyrie, recross?
Yes, Your Honor. That evening, you talked with Officer Klein, correct?
Yes, I did.
And he told you Brett fit the petty theft profile, correct?
Yes, he did, and I agreed.
And right after that, he directed the Blake vehicle to the east.
He had to go back to his post and start directing the traffic.
Right after he told you that Brett Parkland fit the petty theft profile, he sent the Blake vehicle to the east.
Yes, Chris's car was first in line.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Young. You may step down. Thank you for testifying. Prosecution, you may call your second witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Officer Michelle Popovich. Is the bench ready to proceed?
Yes.
Please state your name and occupation for the court.
My name is Michelle Popovich, and I'm an officer with the Mobius Police Department.
And how long have you worked for the police department, Ms. Popovich?
For about 10 years.
Have you had any previous law enforcement experience prior to working for Mobius?
Yes, sir. Originally, I worked as a detective in a large metropolis, which was about triple the size of Mobius.
What then led you to come and work for Mobius?
I desired to move to a smaller town. I felt my skills and experience would really benefit a smaller community.
Now, do you know the defendant, Chris Blake?
Yes, sir, I do.
How so?
I was the officer who searched the backpack belonging to Chris Blake, and I served as Chris's arresting officer upon finding marijuana in this backpack and being informed that it belonged to her.
Now, where precisely was Ms. Blake arrested?
Miss Blake was arrested at a sobriety checkpoint which my police department had set up.
Now, officer, are these sobriety checkpoints uncommon for the Mobius community?
No, setting up these checkpoints are not a new or rare occurrence for the community or for the Mobius Police Department.
What precisely, officer, is the purpose or intent of these said checkpoints?
It is our intent at these checkpoints to find those individuals who are under the influence of alcohol and also those individuals whom the law considers too young to be drinking in possession of alcohol.
Officer, based on your decade of experience with the Mobius Police Department, is alcohol the only thing discovered at these checkpoints?
No, sir, it is not. Although that is our original intent, it is not surprising that individuals at these checkpoints provide an officer with reasonable cause to pursue other lines of questioning which may involve further investigations.
And again, based on your decade of experience, what, if any, method is followed when an officer would operate one of these such checkpoints?
The Mobius Police Department has set up a standard procedure which my fellow officers and I do follow through with at these checkpoints. Every car that reaches the checkpoint is pulled over. We then ask the drivers if they've been drinking, smell their breaths, and observe their conduct for anything out of the norm.
Now, officer, were all the aspects of the Mobius sobriety checkpoint system in place on the night of May 19th?
Absolutely, sir.
Now, let's discuss the events of the evening of May 19th. Officer, what, if anything, of significance took place prior to the defendant arriving at your roadblock?
Just prior to Miss Blake's car, reaching the roadblock, I was informed by Officer Pine, my fellow officer also working this checkpoint, that approximately 100 yards before our checkpoint, an individual had pulled its car over to the shoulder and someone had exited this car.
To your knowledge, officer, was anyone sent after this fleeing individual?
No, sir, I don't believe anyone was sent in that direction.
Well, then, was this fleeing individual ever forced through your checkpoint on the evening of May 19th?
No, sir.
Now, officer, during the course of the evening, did you see anything that confirmed this dispatch to you?
Yes, actually, I did look down after receiving this information, and I noticed that a car was pulling away from the shoulder, which confirmed Officer Pine's report.
Your Honors, this is an exhibit stipulated as Prosecution Exhibit 1. Let the record reflect I'm showing opposing counsel. May I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Does the bench have copies?
Yes.
Now, officer, could you please describe the exhibit before you?
This is a copy of how the checkpoint was set up the evening of May 19th.
And could you please describe the layout of this checkpoint as Chris Blake's car arrived?
I stood just aside Miss Blake's car. Officer Pine was in the adjacent lane with another car at that time. Present in Miss Blake's vehicle were 3 individuals. She was in the driver's seat, and there were 2 individuals present in the back seat. However, there was no individual in this front passenger seat, which I found highly suspicious, especially considering the information I'd received before of the car stopping before a checkpoint and an individual exiting this car.
Were there any other officers in service near the vicinity of the checkpoint that evening?
Yes, sir. Officer Klein was several yards ahead directing traffic that evening.
Now, officer, did you have any contact with Officer Klein during the course of the evening?
No, sir, I did not.
Now, you mentioned you found the seating arrangement in the defendant's car as somewhat suspicious. Officer, as Chris Blake approached your checkpoint, what, if anything else, did you find suspicious about Chris Blake or his car?
As I approached Miss Blake in her vehicle, I did notice that she had a very heavy scent of peppermint on her breath.
Now, based on your years of law enforcement experience, officer, what makes this peppermint breath so significant?
In my previous experience operating these checkpoints, I have found that many offenders do attempt to mask their breath with peppermints.
Now, did you act on this information?
No, I did not. I didn't feel that peppermint breath alone would be enough at this point to warrant any direct action.
What then did you do precisely?
I continued to follow through with standard procedure and asked Miss Blake to provide me with her driver's license, which she proceeded to do.
Was there anything out of order with the defendant's license?
No, sir, her license was in order.
What happened next?
As I was looking over this license, my attention was drawn to the back seat where I noticed that a conversation had picked up. These individuals were whispering, so I couldn't hear what they were saying. But it was during this conversation that one of the individuals suddenly got up and grabbed a backpack that was resting in the front seat.
Now, officer, could you please describe this backpack as you viewed it for the court?
Yes, sir. It was a blue and gray backpack, and I noticed that it was partially opened, and it was through this opening that I saw part of a plastic ring hanging out.
Now, drawing your attention back to that exhibit, officer, could you please indicate to the court the location of the backpack at the time you observed it?
It rested in the front passenger seat.
And again, drawing your attention to that exhibit, was there anyone else present with you that night that had the same point of view of that backpack as yourself?
No, there were only Miss Blue and the individuals in the back seat, all of whom would have had a point of view from the rear of the vehicle.
Now, officer, you mentioned this youth grabbing for this backpack. Did you react to this?
Yes, I most certainly did.
How so?
I asked the individual to please drop the backpack.
And what happened next?
One of the youth in the back seat suddenly yelled, "She's got a gun."
Now, officer, how precisely did you interpret this statement?
While this comment itself was alarming, I did not think much of it. What I was concerned with was the timing that it was uttered. At this point, I saw that every individual there did not have a gun in their possession. However, I did have someone holding on to a backpack, contents unknown to me, and at this point, I felt my safety might be threatened.
So, what in specific, officer, led you to take action on the evening of May 19th?
I put together all the facts that I gathered that night, starting with the information I received of a car stopping before the checkpoint, the odd seating arrangement as this car approached me, the peppermint breath of Chris Blake, the perceived weight of this backpack as the individual reached for it, and the plastic can rings, which gave me a heavy suspicion that there was alcohol. But more importantly, the possibility that whatever was contained in this backpack was posing a threat to me and the other individuals present that evening.
Now, officer, what action, if any, did you take?
By this point, the individual had dropped the backpack into the front seat, so I reached in, took it out, and conducted a search.
What did your search yield?
Upon searching this backpack, I found a couple cans of Coke, a book, some cell phones, a marijuana cigarette, and a large bag of marijuana.
Now, what, if any, response issued from Chris Blake's car?
Miss Blake admitted that the backpack and the contents belonged to her.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honors.
Thank you. Counsel for defendant, do you wish to cross-examine the witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Officer Popovich.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
My name is Sandra Moon, and I'll just be asking a few questions on behalf of the defendant, Chris Blake. Now, you stated that you've been officer at Mobius for 10 years,
Yes, I have.
and prior to that, you worked as a detective.
Yes, ma'am.
So you have a pretty extensive knowledge as to different areas in law enforcement.
Yes, I do.
And are you familiar with directing traffic, specifically concerning sobriety checkpoints?
No, I've never been involved in the area of directing traffic, actually.
You've never been involved?
No, ma'am.
Well, to your knowledge, based on your experience as a police officer, would it be proper police procedure for an officer to choose a car, and because of the race of someone in a car, direct them towards a sobriety checkpoint?
Objection, Your Honor. Opposing counsel has already shown that witness lacks personal knowledge of any of such.
May I respond?
Yes, you may.
Your Honor, she's been a police officer for 10 years, and this also goes to test the credibility of the police officer because she already testified that in addition to the 10 years, she also worked more years prior in law enforcement.
Objection is overruled.
Thank you.
Could you repeat that, ma'am, please?
Would it be proper police procedure for an officer directing traffic to choose out an individual and because of their race, direct them towards a sobriety checkpoint?
No, ma'am, not solely on race. I don't believe so.
And that evening you stated you were conducting the sobriety checkpoint?
Yes, I was, along with Officer Pine.
So you weren't present where Officer Klein was, were you?
No, I was not.
So you don't know how he chose which cars to send to the checkpoint?
That is correct.
Now, you stated that you conducted the checkpoint on the defendant, Chris Blake?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Now, as Chris Blake's vehicle approached the checkpoint, did you notice any swerving?
No, in the 100 yards that I did observe his vehicle driving, I did not observe that.
And when you began to ask Chris Blake questions, did you notice any slurring in his speech?
No, ma'am, I did not.
Any bloodshot eyes?
No, ma'am.
And you didn't notice any erratic hand movements?
No, ma'am.
So in fact, you didn't observe any behavioral indications that the driver had consumed alcohol that evening, correct?
That is correct. Only solely the peppermint breath at that point.
Okay, so let's talk about that peppermint smell. Now, you would agree that mints are used as a candy?
Yes, they are, ma'am.
Okay. And they're also used to mask bad breath?
Yes, they are, correct.
And during the checkpoint, you mentioned that Lauren Chambliss reached for a backpack?
Correct.
And prior to her movement, did you ever tell anyone in the car not to move?
No, ma'am, I did not.
And when she was reaching for the backpack, did you ask her why she was reaching for it?
I asked her to drop the backpack, so no, I did not ask her that question, correct.
And during this point, you mentioned that Brett Parkland made a comment about a gun.
Correct.
Now, that evening, you had your hand on your service revolver, right?
Yes, ma'am, I had placed it earlier in the evening. That's what we do when faced with a suspicious situation, which this clearly was.
Now, let's talk about this suspicious situation. You stated during direct examination that you were in fear for your own safety, correct?
Correct.
And this fear was based because you felt that someone in the car had a gun?
I didn't know what was contained in the backpack, possibly a gun, correct.
And now, officer, do you remember giving a sworn affidavit?
Yes, I do, ma'am.
And in the affidavit, you stated all relative and material facts?
Objection, Your Honor. Opposing counsel, witness is incapable of judging what is a relative or material fact to this case.
Your Honor, this is how you present an affidavit, and in it, the witness agrees to state all relative and material facts.
Yeah, the objection's overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Could you repeat that, please, ma'am?
Do you remember giving an affidavit?
Yes, I do, ma'am.
And in that, you stated all relative and material facts?
According to the questions that I was asked, correct.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
For opposing counsel's purposes, I'll be referring to Officer Popovich's affidavit, specifically on the 3rd page. Now, on that 3rd page where you're talking about the gun, can you point out specifically where you state that you were in fear for your own safety because you felt the students had a gun?
It was never stated here. I was never asked that question during my interview.
So it's not in your affidavit,
No,
is it?
ma'am, it is not.
In fact, the only thing you say in that paragraph is that you did not think much of this comment.
Which I didn't. I didn't have time to, correct.
Now, it was at this point where you grabbed the backpack from the car, correct?
Correct.
And did you ask for consent to grab the backpack?
I did not need consent at this point. Not only did I have reasonable cause, but I was in fear for my personal safety, so those two did warrant my search of the backpack.
And let's talk about the reasonable cause. You saw plastic rings sticking out of the backpack,
Yes, ma'am, I did.
and you would agree that those plastic rings could be used to hold non-alcoholic beverages, such as pop.
Correct.
And in fact, they were connected to pop cans, correct?
Yes, they were. Upon my search, that's what they were connected to.
And you also stated that the backpack looked heavy.
Yes, it did.
And you also stated that it could have been filled with books.
Correct, but all the facts that I had previously gathered led to my suspicion of alcohol.
So the answer is yes.
Correct.
And once you grabbed that backpack, you started searching its contents, didn't you?
Yes, I did, ma'am.
And you didn't ask for consent to search the backpack, did you?
No, I did not. I did not need consent.
And you never received consent, did you?
No, I did not.
Now, officer, this night ultimately led to the arrest of Chris Blake.
Yes, ma'am, it did.
And this was a particularly significant arrest for you, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And that's because it was your 200th arrest.
Yes, it was, ma'am.
And Officer Popovich, because you arrested Chris Blake that evening, you received an award and a bonus, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy, wish to redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Bench ready to proceed? Now, officer, you just recently spoke on cross-examination about your 200th drug arrest. Now, officer, approximately how long have you been working to get these 200 drug arrests?
I've been working for 10 years.
Now, doing the math, approximately how many months or how many drug arrests per month is that?
I believe it'd be a little under 2 per month.
Now, officer, did you come to Mobius solely for the benefit of this 200 drug arrest program?
No, sir, I was not aware of this program until I had been working at Mobius for quite some time.
Moreover, did you expect to find drugs in Chris Blake's backpack that night?
No, I did not.
Now, you also made several statements about your affidavit on cross-examination. Now, officer, what material facts did you state in your affidavit?
I stated the facts pertaining to my suspicion of alcohol, which is what I was questioned when I gave my statement, considering that this was a sobriety checkpoint, so that was our intent at these checkpoints.
In your affidavit, why didn't you expound on your fear for personal safety?
I was never questioned about this topic.
And you were also questioned on cross-examination about not asking for consent to retrieve the backpack from the car. Officer, why did you not ask for consent?
I had reasonable cause. As I stated, I had all these facts that I'd gathered, which led me to believe there was alcohol in this backpack, and I did feel that my personal safety could be in danger, and that is why I conducted this search and did not receive consent.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honors.
Thank you. Ms. Moe, do you wish to recross?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Officer Popovich, you stated that you did not need consent to search the backpack because you had a reasonable suspicion.
Correct.
And that reasonable suspicion was based on breath mints.
Not solely breath mints, but
But there's-
those were one of those, correct.
As you stated, breath mints can be used for other purposes.
Yes, but at these checkpoints, I have found that that is what many offenders do use to mask their breath of alcohol.
Okay, now let's move on to the plastic pop rings. You would agree that those plastic rings can be used to hold non-alcoholic beverages.
Yes, ma'am.
And the heavy book bag, you also stated that it could have been filled with books.
Yes, ma'am.
Now you stated that one of your reasons for accessing the bag was because you're in fear for your own personal safety.
Yes, that was one of the reasons, among many.
And officer, once again, nowhere in your affidavit did it state that you were in fear for your personal safety because you felt the students had a gun.
Objection, Your Honor. This has been asked and answered on cross-examination.
Your Honor, this is the recross
Yeah,
examination.
it's overruled.
Thank you.
Could you repeat that, please, ma'am?
No, once again, you partially based your decision to access the bag because you're in fear for your own safety.
Yes, that was one of the reasons, correct.
And once again, nowhere in your affidavit did it state that you were in fear for your own safety because you felt the students had a gun.
That is correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Officer, you may step down. Thank you for testifying. Counsel for defendant, you may call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. We call Dr. Blue. Please introduce yourself to the court.
My name is Sky Blue. I'm a professor of sociology at Boardtown University.
What is your educational background, Dr. Blue?
I received my undergraduate degrees in the 70s from the University of California, Berkeley.
What are your responsibilities as a professor?
As professor, not only do I teach classes and give lectures, but I also am a member of a board that overhears dissertations from our PhD candidates at the university.
Have you published any papers?
Yes, I've published several papers on the interplay between race and our criminal justice system. Through my research, I've found that race often affects the fundamental functioning of our justice system and the operation of our police departments.
Do you have any areas of specialization?
Yes, some special interests of mine are criminology, civil rights, and more recently, profiling. I actually became aware of profiling a little over a year ago through one of the dissertations from our PhD candidates.
What is profiling, Dr. Blue?
Objection, Your Honor. This calls for expert opinion or expert knowledge, and this witness has not yet been established as an expert.
Your Honor, the witness has established that she has a degree in psychology as well as a specialization in criminology and the interplay between race and the criminal justice system. As she's also published papers in this area as well as done research, her own research. She knows she's an expert in profiling.
Objection is overruled.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
What is profiling?
When used correctly, profiling is a tool that police officers can utilize to determine suspects for a crime or people who are at risk for committing crimes. Profiling is basically a compilation of appropriate characteristics of people that may commit crimes.
Do you have any experience with profiling, Dr. Blue?
Yes, upon being interested in profiling, I did 2 separate studies. One was just a study into the alleged relationship between race, economic status, and committing crimes. The other study was a specific review of the Mobius profile.
What did your investigation of the Mobius profile help you to learn?
Well, upon investigating the Mobius profile, I first read articles about its creation, read articles about proper profiling methods, and then reviewed the final profile. I discovered that the Mobius profile is flawed in 3 ways: the methodology that the data was gathered to compile the profile, the statistical reliability of the data, and also the resulting product.
You know, you said there's a problem with the methodology. Can you explain to the court what you mean?
The starting point for a profile must not be just the people who have been caught and convicted of committing crimes. It must be all the people that commit crimes. So therefore, the only correct way to develop sufficient data for a profile is to hire researchers to do a blind study to get, and then under the guise of anonymity, people who have committed crimes but not been caught or convicted will reveal their actions, and then their characteristics can be added into the profile. This just finds a more complete universe, so the profile is more valid.
And you also said there was a problem with the statistical reliability of the profile. What did you mean?
The Mobius profile is based solely on the records from the Mobius Court of Common Pleas and the records from the Mobius Juvenile Court. Since Mobius is a small community with a relatively low crime rate, there was not enough data to provide statistically valid conclusions.
And what was the problem with the resulting product?
Beside the fact that there wasn't enough data and it was the incorrect data, the resulting product, the final Mobius petty theft profile, includes characterizations such as race and economic status, which I found in my review of the alleged correlation between race and committing crimes, that if you were to interview middle-class, affluent Caucasian teens, you would find they commit just as many crimes as poor minority status teens. Therefore, these characteristics are improper in a profile.
Based upon your education, training, experience, and review of the profile, have you reached an opinion within a reasonable degree of certainty as to the propriety of the profile?
Yes, I have.
And what is that opinion, Dr. Blue?
For the 3 reasons I just stated, the Mobius profile is inherently flawed and inapplicable.
Earlier today, we heard about the Mobius Moortown baseball game of May 19th. Did you attend that game?
Yes, I was there.
And are you familiar, and what were you doing that evening?
Well, I went to the game to see the baseball game, and after it was done, I began walking home east along Preston Way.
And are you familiar with the area surrounding the high school?
Yes, I often attend these games, so this is the usual location.
Your Honor, permission to approach the witness?
Yes, you do.
For opposing counsel's purposes, I'll be referring to Exhibit 1. Let the record reflect that I have shown the opposing counsel. I believe Your Honors have a copy.
Yes, we do.
Can you please identify this document for the court?
Yes, this is a depiction of the area around the high school parking lot, Elm Street, Preston Way, and where the roadblock was set up that night. There's also an enlarged depiction of the roadblock.
And again, what were you doing that evening?
I was at the game. I was there that evening to watch the baseball game.
And as you left the game, what, if anything, happened?
Well, I left the game and walked east along Preston Way this way, and then I noticed that the Mobius Police Department had set up a sobriety roadblock, as they often do after these games, and I approached the officers conducting the roadblock to speak with them.
Why did you approach the officer?
It is my opinion that roadblocks should not be used frequently in the United States, because I don't think there's reasonable cause to stop every car when there's no suspicion or evidence that they have done anything wrong.
Objection, Your Honor. Motion to strike witness's testimony. Dr. Young, or Professor Blue, has no expert knowledge or training in law enforcement.
This simply just went to explain why she approached the officer in the checkpoint.
I'll sustain the objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
When you approached the checkpoint, what did you see?
Well, I saw that the police department had set up their normal routine. They check 2 cars at a time by utilizing both lanes and have an officer approach each car. I approached the officer checking the car in the rightmost lane, which just happened to be Officer Popovich checking Chris Blake's red convertible.
And when you walked up to the car, what did you see Officer Popovich doing that evening?
Well, at that point, he was questioning Chris Blake about the basic questions of a checkpoint, and I stood
Your Honor, motion to strike. This calls for hearsay.
Your Honor, she hasn't given any hearsay yet.
Objection to the rule. Yeah, she hasn't said anything yet.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And I just stood a few feet behind the officer towards the passenger compartment of the car, where there were 2 students sitting in the back seat who were conversing with each other. And at this point, there was no one sitting in the front seat, and instead a book bag was resting there, and it was closed.
And once you heard the students having this conversation, what happened after that conversation?
Well, as they were talking, I heard one of them say something about needing to call someone.
Objection, Your Honor. Motion to strike as hearsay.
Your Honor, this is not for the truth. This simply is a sequence of the events.
I overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The student then began to slowly reach into the front seat towards the backpack. And once she had laid her hand on the backpack, the officer who was questioning Chris Blake began to yell and scream at her to drop the bag.
And once the officer yelled and screamed at the student, what did he do next?
Well, after yelling and screaming at her, the student, Lauren, dropped the bag, and the officer reached into the car, grabbed the bag, and violently removed it from the vehicle.
And once the officer had possession of the bag, what did he do?
At this point, the officer opened the bag and began to search through it. After searching through it for a few minutes, he held up out of its contents a large bag of marijuana and proceeded to arrest the driver of the vehicle, Chris Blake.
And did the officer ever tell any of the passengers in the vehicle not to move?
No, he never gave any instruction to that effect.
Did he ever obtain consent to search the bag?
No, he did not.
And after the officer arrested Chris Blake, what did you do?
After the officer had arrested Chris Blake, I continued walking home east along Preston Way to where I live.
Thank you. No further questions.
Would you cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Ready to proceed?
May proceed.
Good afternoon, Ms. Blue.
Good afternoon.
Now, Ms. Blue, is it your contention that long-standing racial and economic bigotry is woven into institutions such as police operations and the judicial system?
That is commonly founded through my research.
But yes or no, that is your belief?
That is my belief.
And also that this so-called inherent bigotry is only perpetuated by the use of such practices as criminal profiling, correct?
By utilizing the convictions in the court, it does perpetuate this vicious cycle of finding the teens who are only caught. By only utilizing their characteristics, it does further this.
So this is a yes?
Yes.
Now, you wrote a few papers expressing your opinions about the workings of the criminal justice system, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you possess a particular interest in criminology, do you not?
Yes, I do.
But yet your only degree resides in sociology, not criminology, correct?
Yes, that is the only degree I have achieved.
In fact, the first time you became familiar with profiling and profiling techniques was only a little over a year ago, correct?
Yes, it was about over a year ago, but profiling is very...
Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. So despite your limited knowledge of criminology, you still still believe that bigotry within the justice system occurs because people like the police, the judges, and the juries don't want to be responsible for ruining the prospects of such individuals, correct?
That does seem to occur occasionally, yes.
You even go as far as stating that the police and the criminal justice system are predisposed to be biased, correct?
Some individuals are biased, yes.
So is that a yes?
Yes.
Now, considering all that you have told us about your beliefs about policing and the criminal profiling system, would it be an accurate statement to say that you dislike the idea of profiling being used in your own community?
Only profiles that are improper, such as ones that are racially based or do not utilize the correct characterizations.
Is that a yes?
Only racially based ones, yes.
In fact, it outrages you, you would call it a travesty to the human spirit.
I think that it's improper and it can harm people's inner selves.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Now, on direct examination, you mentioned that Moby's Police Department had not taken samples from samples that would yield statistically valid information, correct?
Yes, the Mobius Police Department did not have enough data to yield these
And you claim that
conclusions.
there aren't enough crimes in Mobius from which to draw any reliable conclusions, correct?
In crimes such as petty theft, you would need virtually hundreds of convictions, and the Mobius courts just simply did not have these numbers.
So is that a yes?
Yes.
But the only example that you can provide for this idea is that Mobius has had only 2 murders in the past 15 years, making their court records unreliable for a good prediction of such criminal activity, correct?
That was the only example I stated, but it does show that
Yes.
Mobius has a low crime rate.
With this in mind, the Mobius court records would not have reflect a history of homicide, correct?
No, they would not.
But Mobius has had a history of small electronics being stolen.
Like most communities, there are petty thefts, but since petty theft is so common, you would need very, very many convictions, and this Mobius simply does not have enough numbers.
So is that a yes that Mobius has had a history of small personal electronics being stolen?
Yes.
Now, the profile that the Mobius Police Department was created was to identify a juvenile petty theft offender, correct?
Yes, that is the profile.
And although murder does not fall under the category of juvenile petty theft, the theft of personal electronics does.
Yes, that would fall under petty theft.
Now, let's turn our attention to the night in question, will we, Ms. Bloom?
All right.
You were present the night of Chris Blake's arrest, were you not?
Yes, I was there at the checkpoint.
And you saw him only after the point he reached the roadblock, not earlier, as he was at the parking lot.
Yes, I only saw him at the roadblock.
And seeing a roadblock caused you to be annoyed.
I was annoyed at its use.
And because of this annoyance, you walked up to the attending officer to voice your disapproval.
I walked up to him to discuss my disapproval, yes.
And just to clarify, you do not have any training or education in the field of law enforcement, do you?
Not formal education in law enforcement, no.
So that yes.
Yes, I have no training in law enforcement.
Thank you. So you would not be able to determine what is legally defined as appropriate or suspicious, correct? As it is legally defined?
Not legally, no. But laws constantly change, so I was just going to voice my opinion.
So is that a yes?
Yes.
Now, I'd like to draw the court's attention to Exhibit 1. I believe Ms. Wu has a copy of it already. Yes, I do. Now, could you please indicate to the court where you were standing in proximity to Blake's vehicle?
Yes, I'll refer to the enlarged copy. I was standing closer to the passenger cavity, about a couple feet behind Officer Popovich.
And from where you were able to notice that the seating arrangement was unusual, correct?
Yes, I did notice that there was no one in the front passenger seat.
And that it was unusual?
That is a little unusual.
And also from where you were standing, you witnessed as one of the backseat passengers suddenly reached for a bag lying in the front seat, correct?
Yes, I saw the movement.
And was this bag opened?
No, it was not.
And you saw this from where you were standing, correct?
Yes, since it was a convertible and I was standing up, I could see over the car and into it.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Okay.
Is it not true that from where you were standing, in front of you, between you and the bag, there was a backseat passenger was between you and the bag, correct?
Yes, but since I was standing,
Yes or no?
Yes.
And also from where you're standing, the back seat would be between you and the bag, correct?
For about 3 feet, 4 feet.
So is that a yes?
Yes, that is correct.
And also the bag was down lower in the seat, correct?
Not that low, but it was at the bottom of the seat. It
And the
was
seat
lower.
had a back to it, correct?
It had a back, yes.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Blue, yes or no, from that distance, you could not hear all of the conversation going on inside the vehicle, correct?
I couldn't specifically hear all of the comments. I was trying to listen to both conversations at the same time.
So is that a yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And from the conversation between Officer Popovich and Chris Blake, and the conversation going on in the back seat, these would be the conversations you could not hear?
I could not listen to both every word simultaneously.
Now, focusing on the conversation in the back seat, being rather quiet, you could not hear all of the conversation. You could only hit bits and pieces,
Yes, that's correct.
and you could only guess at what was going on.
From what I could hear, I could figure things out, but I did not hear everything. That's correct.
In fact, your ability to hear what was going on in the vehicle was so limited that you could not even hear why Officer Popovich arrested Chris Blake.
No, I did not hear the admission.
In fact, you were surprised when Chris Blake was arrested, correct?
I thought that the officer might be inclined to arrest the person sitting in the back seat, so I was a little surprised.
And this was basically because you figured that if Officer Popovich was going to arrest anyone, it would be Brett Parkland, correct?
Well, since I am very familiar with how race affects the police system, I do know that race tends to affect its functioning and that the police officer may be inclined to arrest the minority sitting in the back seat.
Is that a yes, Ms. Blue?
Yes, that's correct.
And this was because Brett fit the profile, correct?
All I could see was his race, and race is the most noticeable and one of the characterizations of the drug trafficking profile.
Brett did fit the profile, Ms. Blue.
His ethnicity certainly did.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Myring, a redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel asked you about the bigotry in the justice system. Can you explain how you came to the opinion that there is bigotry in the justice system?
Well, as a sociologist, I've reviewed many cases dealing with human interaction, which includes the justice system and that interaction. And since criminology is also a subspecialty of mine, I've done much research into this field, and it's been a conclusions I've reached through years and years of research.
And what was your opinion on the Mobius Police Department profile?
My opinion is that it is inherently flawed for 3 ways, 2 of which have to do with the amount of data that was gathered.
And why was there not enough data?
There was not enough data because Mobius is a small community with a small crime rate. They simply did not have enough numbers to create a statistically valid profile for petty theft, which is a very common crime.
All right, and when you approached the checkpoint, where were you standing?
I was standing nearer to the rear passenger compartment of the car, but very close to the car.
And what kind of car was it?
It was a red convertible with the top down since it was a nice evening.
So could you see inside of the car?
I could see inside of the car very well since my line of sight was above everything else in the car since I was standing up and the people in the car were sitting down and the seats are not as tall as I am, so they did not block my line of sight.
And when you saw Lauren Chambliss reach for the bag, can you demonstrate how she reached for the bag?
She was sitting here and the bag was in front of her in the seat there, so she sort of slowly reached like this and grabbed the bag and began to lift it up.
Thank you.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Blue, your opinion about the bigotry in the criminal justice system, that is an opinion, correct?
Through my year of research, it's a conclusion I've come to.
Is it yes, an opinion?
It's an opinion supported by facts I have found through years of research.
So is that a yes?
Yes, it's an opinion.
Now, also on redirect, opposing counsel brought up the issue of the Mobius Police Department being confined to the profile being confined to a relatively small area. Now, being so limited, it would not reflect a larger city's crime rate, correct?
Yes, that's correct, but there are other cities Mobius could have turned to support its data. Had Mobius looked at another city with similar demographics,
Honors.
this would have further supported the data.
No question has been posed for this witness. Would you please restrict her to only answer
The
the
witness
question?
is instructed to respond to the question and confine your response to the question.
So it would not reflect a big city's crime rate, correct?
Of course not.
Now, the Mobius Police Department's profile was based on its own court records, correct?
Yes, it was.
So it would reflect Mobius's crime rate, correct?
It would reflect the
Yes or
crime
no?
rate of Mobius, yes.
And this profile was used only in Mobius, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, did, in fact, Lauren Chambliss lift the bag in the midst of Officer Popovich's conversation with Chris Blake
Yes, it occurred while he was questioning Chris Blake.
during it?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Dr. Blue, thank you. You may step down. Thank you for testifying. Defendant, defense counsel may Call your next witness.
The defense calls Brett Parkland. Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
My name is Brett Parkland, and I'm a junior at Mobius High School.
And where do you live?
I actually live with my mom and my grandma because my father did leave us when I was 3, but it's great having my grandmother there to help support my mom too, and having 2 role models is really great. They support me in everything.
Now, a moment ago you mentioned that you were a student at Mobius High School. Can you describe yourself as a student?
Well, I like to consider that I work hard and I try my best. From what my mom's taught me, she's always taught me to work hard and hopefully I'll succeed, and that's part of the reason why I'm taking the harder classes, sort of to prepare me for college, so in hopes that I can get a good job and support my mom as well as she supported me. I've also taken these hard classes. I have maintained a 3.7 GPA.
And Brett, just for the record, what's your ethnic origin?
Well, considering my family's background and my family's customs, I am a minority.
Now, Brett, earlier you heard some witnesses testifying about a Mobius baseball game. Did you attend that game?
Yes, I actually went, and I went there and I met up with my friends Chris, Alex, and Lauren.
Could you describe what happened after that game?
Well, we were all really excited because we won, and it was really cool. So we were out in the parking lot, and we were supposed to go back to Chris's house so we could check out some new video games. So we were headed into Chris's convertible, and we were there, and traffic was flowing pretty well out of the parking lot until we reached the end.
And what was at the end of the parking lot?
Well, traffic had gotten congested, and Officer Klein was actually standing in front of us, directing traffic left or right.
Now, you mentioned Officer Klein. Were you familiar with this officer before the night in question?
Well, actually, that's the officer who usually stops me when I'm in the good part of town, when I'm walking towards my friend Chris's house.
Could you describe your observations, what happened while you were stopped?
Well, while we were stopped, Officer Klein was talking to Miss Young, our school counselor, and it was kind of unusual because she never took her eyes off me. Officer Klein continued to stare at me, and this made me feel very uncomfortable.
And did Officer Klein ever do anything?
Officer Klein just continued to stare at me while she was talking to Miss Young, and just the staring made me feel uncomfortable, and it had taken a while.
And what eventually happened?
Well, after we had gone up, it was about a minute before traffic cleared to the left, and it seemed like an eternity, but then it was probably only a minute. And a minute later, Officer Klein did direct us to the right, even though traffic was clear to the left.
And what ultimately led in the direction of the right?
Well, we didn't know it then, but it did end up reaching the checkpoint.
Can you describe what happened as Chris Blake's vehicle approached the checkpoint?
Well, we were going, and I noticed Miss Young had fallen into line behind us. So I was a little curious as to why she was following us, so I was paying attention to behind us. But I did notice we stopped, and Alex did get out of the car.
And what happened after Alex got out of the car?
Well, we proceeded along towards the checkpoint, and it was about a half a block or so. And we were going slowly because each car did have to be stopped by the checkpoint. And then we did approach the checkpoint.
And can you describe what happened once you were at the checkpoint?
Well, Officer Popovich approached the car, and she actually didn't act anything like she did today. She snarled the question at Chris. She snarled and asked if he had been drinking alcohol, and of course Chris said no.
Had anyone in the car that evening been drinking?
No, of course not. We're only in high school.
And was there any indication that alcohol was present?
Objection,
No.
Your Honor. Calls for speculation.
Your Honor, this is based on the witness's observations.
Objection to the rule.
Your Honor.
There was no indication of anything. We weren't slurring our speech. We weren't swerving. We weren't doing anything like that would make us look like we were consuming alcohol or anything.
And after Officer Popovich asked Chris questions, did she take any actions?
Actually, she just stood there for a moment and really didn't let us continue on.
And what happened at that point?
Well, at that point, Lauren and I were whispering not to disturb the officer, and she mentioned that she needed to call her mom, so she reached forward to get her cell phone out of the backpack.
And what happens once she reached for a cell phone?
The cop went totally ballistic and started yelling at her and yelled for her to drop the bag, and at that point, she even started drawing her gun, and I was totally panicked, so I said, she's got a gun, and it was just very scary.
And what happened at this point?
Well, at this point, Lauren dropped the bag immediately and sat back. We were stunned. And the officer ripped the bag out of the car, actually hitting Chris on the head on the way out. And once the officer had control of the bag, she went ahead and unzipped it and was fumbling around and searching for something.
And Brett, either when Officer Popovich reached for the bag or began searching it, did she ever ask for consent?
No, not at all.
Thank you. No further questions.
McCarthy, do you wish to cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor. Is the bench ready to proceed? Good afternoon, Brett.
Good afternoon.
Now, you and your friends exited the baseball game in Chris Blake's convertible, is that right?
Yes.
And you yourself were sitting in the back seat, is that right?
Yes, I was sitting behind Chris.
Now, Chris had placed the top of his convertible down that night, is that right?
Yeah, it was a really nice night, so we had the top down.
Now, did this make it possible for people to see down into that convertible?
Yeah.
Now, when Chris Blake's car approached the intersection to leave the parking lot, there was a policeman directing traffic, was there not?
Yes, that was Officer Klein.
Moreover, you said you noticed this officer staring in your general direction.
The officer was staring at me, and that made me feel very uncomfortable.
In fact, Brett, this would be the same officer that you allege is always bothering and harassing you, is that right?
Yes, that is the officer that usually stops me.
In fact, that night, it sure looked to you like this officer wanted to stop and harass you again, didn't it?
That's the feelings I gathered.
Yet this officer didn't stop you, did he?
No, she was talking to Miss Young.
And he didn't harass you either, did he?
Just the staring made me feel uncomfortable.
He did not physically come over and harass you, did he?
No, not physically.
Now, when you were waiting at that parking lot to leave, Brett, traffic was pretty heavy and slow in both directions when you first arrived, is that right?
When we first arrived, yes.
Now, when Officer Klein directed Chris Blake's car to turn at the intersection, he didn't approach you or speak to you, did he?
No,
Nor did he approach or speak to anyone in that vehicle, is that right?
not in the vehicle. He was talking to Miss Young.
Moreover, from your observations as you were driving towards the sobriety checkpoint, Officer Klein directed Dr. Frieda Young in the same direction as yourself, is that right?
Oh, I wasn't sure if the officer did direct her, but she did fall into line behind us.
Now, about half a block from the roadblock, Chris Blake's car pulled over, is that right?
Yes, we stopped, and I did notice Alex got out.
Yes, you noted Alex got out.
Yes.
And this was despite the fact that everyone in that car was intending to return to Chris's house following the game, is that right?
Yes, I did learn later that Alex's brother just got home from college, and he did want to be there to sort of welcome him home.
That's a yes.
Yes.
In fact, when Alex exited the convertible, he walked away between the houses, is that right?
Yeah, he just walked away towards his house.
Now, Alex Nesbitt not returned to the car, did he?
No,
And he was not forced to go through that roadblock with you and Chris Blake, was he?
no.
Now, when you moved up to the roadblock, you came upon a new police officer, Miss Popovich, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And this officer first asked Chris Blake if he had been drinking that night, is that right?
Yes, she snarled the question, and that just, it sort of was
Is
intimidating.
that a yes?
Yes,
And Chris responded in the negative, is that right?
of course Chris said no.
Now, Lauren Shambliss was also sitting with you in the back seat that night, is that right?
Yes,
And while Chris Blake was dealing with the officer, Lauren reached into the front seat for her backpack, is that right?
well, actually, the officer had stood there for a moment, and it was taking a while, so Lauren did need to call her mom, and she reached forward for the cell phone. Yes, she did.
Now, this backpack was sitting in the front seat, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And this would be the backpack that the back seat that Alex Nesbitt formerly occupied?
It was the front seat, not the back
Front
seat.
seat, excuse me. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, drawing your attention to you still have your exhibit, or did you not receive?
I never received an exhibit.
Your Honor, some copy of Plaintiff's Exhibit 1. May I approach the witness?
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, Ms. Parkland, this is a representation of the sobriety checkpoint on the night of May 19th, is that right?
Yes, that looks pretty accurate.
Now, in that representation, you're seated directly behind Chris Blake, are you not?
Yes, I am.
Moreover, looking at that map, there are no street lights indicated on this map, are there?
Street signs?
Street lights.
No.
Now, Brett, you claim to have seen this bag as closed, don't you?
Yes, it was.
And this would be the clothes bag that was visible to you as you were peering through the back seat, is that right?
Yes, I could see diagonally very clearly.
And this would be the closed portion of the bag that you could see behind Lauren's body and hands that were reaching for the bag, is that
It was
right?
the closed bag that Officer Popovich managed to unzip after she had it.
So is that a yes?
Yes, it was closed.
Now, at this point, Officer Popovich reacted to Lauren's movements, is that right?
Well, she did drop he yelled at her to drop the bag, and she immediately dropped it and sat back.
In fact, as you noted, Officer Popovich reached for her firearm, is that right?
She started drawing her gun.
Now, did that gun leave the holster?
She started drawing
The
it.
gun did not leave the holster, did it?
No, but she did start drawing it.
Now, you, Brett, couldn't believe that the officer would even shoot Lauren for trying to get that backpack, could you?
Of course, it was very scary.
However, Brett, you did not know everything that was in that backpack, is that correct?
As it appears, no.
In fact, you were surprised when Officer Popovich managed to produce marijuana from that backpack, is that correct?
Yes, we were all very stunned.
Now, as all this was happening, you cried out, "She's got a gun," is that right?
After Officer Popovich started drawing her gun, I wanted to warn Lauren that she was ready to shoot her for calling her mom. So, of course, I yelled out, "She's got a gun."
So is that a yes?
Yes.
Now, after this, Lauren dropped the backpack, didn't she?
Yes, and then she sat back.
The officer then retrieved the backpack from the car, is that right?
Yes, without asking if she could take it.
Now, you claim to have seen this backpack hit Chris Blake's face on the way up, is that right?
Yeah, he sort of flinched as it hit him.
Yeah, you cannot discern whether it was the officer or the backpack that hit Chris Blake's face, is that right?
It was one of those, but I definitely saw him flinch, her
Is that a
flinch.
yes?
Yes.
Now, after retrieving the bag, the officer proceeded to search it, is that right?
Yes, she unzipped it and fumbled around in it.
And ultimately, this search produced a bag of marijuana, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
And after this, Chris Blake openly admitted to owning this marijuana, is that right?
Yes, we were all very shocked.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Redirect.
Mr. Honor. Now, Brett, a moment ago you mentioned that before you arrived at the end of the intersection, traffic was heading both directions. But when Officer Klein directed you to the right, can you describe the traffic to the left?
The traffic had cleared, and yet he still directed us to the right.
Now, talking about the actual checkpoint, you made a comment about a gun. And why did you make that comment?
I panicked, and all I saw was Officer Popovich drawing her gun and ready to shoot Lauren for calling her mom.
And you also claimed that Officer Popovich then grabbed the backpack?
Yes, he ripped it out of the car, and in the process, hit Chris Blake.
And at any point, did he ever ask for consent? Sorry.
No, not at all.
Thank you. No further questions.
Recross.
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down. Thank you for coming to testify. Counsel are now permitted 2 minutes to prepare your closing arguments. time has expired. Mr. McCarthy, are you ready to present your argument?
Yes, Your Honors. Bench ready to proceed? Your Honors, opposing counsel, may it please the court. There is a well-known legal strategy, Your Honors, that when the law is on your side, you argue the law, and when the facts are on your side, you argue the facts. From what we have seen in this courtroom today, both the law and the facts reside with the state. Now, though Officer Klein's actions were not for all legal purposes a seizure, they are nonetheless justified by Mobius's valid profile. Therefore, let's look at the facts behind the profile and its involvement in this case. The Mobius Police Department carefully and articulately constructed a profile at the hands of a professional, Dr. Frida Young. Frida Young trained the police force to form a concrete profile with objective tenets. Moreover, as she brought forth in her testimony, Frida Young explicitly stated that any profile must be applied flexibly, meaning that a suspect need only exhibit a majority of the profile's traits to truly fit it. Brett Parkland, therefore, Your Honors, fits the Mobius profile because she fits a majority of its tenets. Now, the law, Your Honors, behind an officer's actions further complements the use of profiling. Brown v. Texas, Your Honors, requires an officer's actions must be based on specific and objective facts. The profile reflects these specific objective facts mandated in such actions. However, the profile was certainly not the sole tool used by Officer Klein on the night of May 19th. He certainly did not direct Dr. Frida Young towards a sobriety checkpoint because she fit any of the profile's characteristics. Now, Your Honors, the facts behind Mobius's sobriety checkpoint system. As indicated by Officer Popovich, the Mobius sobriety checkpoint system had one expressed intent: to detect those driving under the influence or possessing alcohol underage. This does not mean, however, that if a subject in the checkpoint gives an officer reason to believe there is other illegal activity occurring in the vehicle, that the officer is prohibited from conducting or pursuing avenues of investigation to resolve that issue. Now, the law further complements Mobius's sobriety checkpoint system. The Supreme Court in Michigan v. Sitz, Your Honors, upheld the right of police departments to operate checkpoints for reasons such as to check for sobriety, based on a Brown v. Texas balancing test. The sole purpose of the Mobius roadblock was to detect sobriety. Therefore, it is valid. Now, Your Honors, the facts behind the search conducted by Officer Popovich. It was a reasonable search. One clue led to another, and all clues led to one final conclusion. The actions of Chris Blake and his party when they were at that roadblock were suspicious enough to warrant the officer's caution, such as the odd seating arrangement and the strongly minty breath, which Officer Popovich today confirmed is a tactic used to mask intoxication. The final straw, however, was when Lauren Chambliss physically reached for the bag in the front seat. Looking at that backpack, the officer received another clue: exposed six-pack style rings protruding from the backpack, an indication that the students may have been carrying beer. Officer Popovich, being a careful, pragmatic officer, rested her hand on her holster and ordered the bag be dropped in case Lauren was carrying a weapon. Yet Brett Parkland galvanized the officer's fear, shouting, "She's got a gun." This statement, Your Honors, was the equivalent of shouting fire in a crowded building. It mandated a response from Officer Popovich. The officer, startled by Brett's vague outburst, was now in fear for her safety, obligating her to search that backpack. Now, do Officer Popovich's actions operate within the constraints of the law? The answer is yes. In Terry v. Ohio, the arresting officer confined his search to what was strictly to what was minimally necessary to discover what he was seeking. He did not conduct a general exploratory search for whatever evidence of criminal activity he might find. Similarly, Popovich's search was confined and oriented strictly around her observations, and she conducted a minimal search, if you will, of Chris Blake's backpack within the scope of her discretion. Again, in Terry v. Ohio, Your Honors, it also states that in dealing with the rapidly unfolding and often dangerous situations on the streets, the police are in need of an escalating set of flexible responses, graduated in relation to the amount of information they possess. The officer's search was conducted as a response to such a series of escalating and unfolding reactions that, when looked at collectively and holistically, mandated her to search that backpack. Your Honors, looking at both the facts and the law revealed today, the state requests that the defendant's motion to suppress evidence as a result of this search be denied. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. Ms. Myring?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. You're black. You go over there for questioning. You're from another country. Your father doesn't live with you, and you dress differently. You go over there for questioning as well. Oh, and by the way, your friends that are with you, they have to go too. This is the very essence of the Mobius Police Department profile, which is against the fundamental tenets of the 4th and 14th Amendment of our Constitution. Officers Klein and Popovich attempt to use the same type of racially biased profiling to justify the seizure of Brett Parkland and subsequent search and seizure of Chris Blake's backpack as falling under the cloak of police necessity. But lost in all the states in this yet, one of the most fundamental tenets our society is built upon is that the people shall be secure in their privacy, secure from the arbitrary intrusion of the police, who are supposed to protect and serve the citizens of Mobius. In this case, there are two separate bases at why the evidence should be suppressed. And unlike what the opposing counsels just stated, both the law and the facts are on the side of Chris Blake, the defendant, today. First, in contravention to the 4th and 14th Amendment, Officer Klein, by profiling Brett Parkland, improperly forced all the occupants of the Blake vehicle to an illegal seizure at the checkpoint. And second, there was no reasonable and articulable suspicion for Officer Popovich to search Chris Blake's backpack. As to the first issue, in Michigan Department of State Police v. Cites, the U.S. Supreme Court approved of sobriety checkpoints so long as they are reasonable when considering the balance between the public interest and the severity of impact upon an individual's liberty. In looking at the severity of impact upon an individual's liberty, one must look at the objective intrusion upon the individual. This goes to ensure that there are procedures implemented to limit the police officer's discretion. But as you heard from the prosecution's own witnesses, Blake's path that evening was purposely and not randomly directed by Officer Klein. This fact alone demonstrates that Officer Klein had discretion, and in turn demonstrates the unreasonableness of the seizure. Just as importantly, the vehicle was directed that way because of a racially biased and improperly created profile. As Dr. Young explained, Klein mentioned that Brett Parkland fit the petty theft profile, and then immediately directed the Blake vehicle to the east. Yet, the truth is, the only factor that he would be able to observe would be race. And Officer Popovich said that it is not proper police procedure to send a vehicle towards a checkpoint based on race. This is exactly what Officer Klein did that evening. He took one moment to look at the Blake vehicle, one moment to look at Brett Parkland, and decided that he fit the profile and orchestrated his and his friend's seizure at the checkpoint. This leads us to the second issue, the improper search and seizure of the backpack itself. In U.S. v. Ross, the Supreme Court has held that there must be probable cause to search the backpack in a vehicle. The Supreme Court continues in Terry v. Ohio. In order to have a probable cause, the officer must have observed facts that would be sufficient to warrant a prudent person to believe that the arrestee has committed a crime. Here, we must focus on Officer Popovich's observations during the Chris Blake stop. What did Officer Popovich see? Opposing counsel talked about an unusual seating arrangement. Although the seating arrangement may have been unusual, this does not constitute that the people in the car had committed a crime. Officer Popovich saw plastic rings sticking out of a backpack. Yet even Officer Popovich admits that these can be used to hold any of a variety of canned beverages together. Popovich smelled mint on Chris Blake's breath, but mint doesn't stop a drunk driver from slurring their speech or keep a drunk driver's eyes from looking bleary or glassy. So all that is left is Lauren Chambliss' reach for her backpack and Brett Parkland's comment about a gun. Popovich even admitted that she never believed that Chambliss was reaching for a gun, that she never had any fear for her safety, and in fact knew Parkland was referring to Popovich and Popovich's gun. Officer Popovich said that the gun had no effect on him. The truth is, he's trying to say that he was in fear for his safety to justify the search. Finally, when in complete control of the backpack, he never bothered to get consent. Instead, he rummaged through the backpack to try to find something to use against the occupants in the car. In the end, Officer Popovich's actions were based upon a hunch, using generic facts as a pretext to a search. We therefore ask this court to grant the defendant's motion to suppress. Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you, Ms. Myron. Mr. McCarthy, do you wish to have rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. Bench ready to proceed. Your Honors, opposing counsel, may it please the court. There are two sides to every story, Your Honor. But when it comes to it, you must look at the cold, hard facts. Today, the defense's contention that Officer Klein's actions on the evening of May 19th justify a seizure have no foundation when looked up to at the facts revealed today. Terry v. Ohio, Your Honor, states that whenever a police officer accosts an individual and restrains his freedom to walk away, he has seized that person. Judging by this definition, Officer Klein's actions did not constitute a seizure. Testimony from Brett Parkland has revealed that Officer Klein did not even approach Chris Blake's car, let alone accost his car. Moreover, when Klein directed Chris Blake out from the parking lot, he did not restrain his freedom to walk away. Example, Alex Nesbitt. He left the car, he was not pursued, and he was not forced through the sobriety checkpoint. Though he was directed to the checkpoint, Officer Klein did not force him through it. The defense's seizure contention simply does not apply when looked at to the facts. Now, Your Honors, in defense's opening statement, they listed two things they intended to prove. One was that Officer Klein intentionally sent Chris Blake towards a sobriety checkpoint on a racial profile. This is simply not the case. To begin with, the profile formed by the Mobius Police Department was not a racial profile. There were a myriad of tenants contrived by the Mobius Police Department at the hands of professional Dr. Frida Young. Race was not the sole element used in this case. Moreover, the defense also stated that Officer Popovich did not have probable cause for her search. And in recent closing, they said because a prudent man in her situation would not have done the same thing. The facts remain, Your Honors. There were several articulable facts that evening that prompted, mandated Officer Popovich to search that bag. The dispatch of Alex Nesbitt leaving the car, strongly minty breath, the perceived weight of the backpack, exposed rings, but most importantly, the statement, "She's got a gun." That, as I stated before, Your Honors, is the equivalent of shouting fire in a crowded building. It mandates some response. A prudent man in the same situation as Officer Popovich would have no question they have to take action and fear for their safety. Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. At this time, the panel will, with the exception of the presiding judge, will recess to deliberate, and I will stay here for a few moments to determine whether either side has any material, any matters regarding material violation of the rules that you wish to bring to my attention.
Be seated. There has been a coup d'etat. I am now the Chief Justice. No, the Chief had another engagement he had to go to, so he asked me to fill in for him. I'd like to give each of the judges an opportunity to make a few brief comments, and then we'll get to the best witness and best attorney awards, and then if you're still interested, we'll announce who won. I'll begin with Judge Gorman.
Thank you, Judge Fain. I thought that, of course, the folks who make it to this final round just did an outstanding job, and I'll resist the temptation to go through each lawyer's performance because you've probably heard your praises sung many times by the time you get here. I'll simply say that I think I've seen finer performances here than I often saw when I was an assistant county prosecutor, and you could probably leave your resumes with quite a few legal offices around the state and do much better than many of the folks who've had 7 years of higher education and passed the bar exam. I was very impressed and enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, Judge Davis?
Well, since I'm here representing the ACLU, I can't resist the opportunity to say that the war on drugs has had tremendous ramifications for our society. And this problem embraces two major ones: how law enforcement uses profiling and how search and seizure rules and guidelines have changed and practices have changed in the course of the war on drugs in the last few decades. I really commend the committee for having drafted this problem, because you now have joined the national debate on these issues. The ACLU is a leader in the debate and trying to bring our society to a better understanding of how to use profiling without profiling based on race and ethnicity, and how to have privacy and autonomy in society without unreasonable search and seizures. And so whether you become prosecutors or defense lawyers someday, hopefully we're all working toward that common goal. And I just thank you very much for bringing such life to this problem and to those major issues.
Judge Smiles?
Thank you. As the chair of the committee that wrote this problem, I have to say it is truly an honor and a thrill to sit here and watch all of you really bring life to this. I also have to say, as to the attorneys here, you guys are excellent. And one of the comments we all made when we were in chambers was the fact that you all understand the rules of evidence, even though you're dealing with modified rules of evidence, and particularly the hearsay rule, perhaps better than many of the attorneys, and have handled that very, very well. As for the witnesses, this is the part that really thrills me. After working on this and spending quite some time trying to give some life to these characters, to actually see all of you here playing these people is just absolutely thrilling to me, and you guys did an excellent job. The last comment, and to perhaps to echo Judge Davis's comment, one of the things we strive to do every year in writing these cases is to bring you issues that not only will allow you to reach this level of competition, but also to educate you as to how our justice system works. Not just what's involved in a trial, but also what your rights and responsibilities are as part of this country. And I hope we have given you something to think about, and through these issues you've been able to explore what it means, what sort of protections you have, and what sorts of obligations you have in that protection. And that's all I would have to comment on.
This time I will recognize Judge Dove, who also is going to be announcing the Best Witness Award.
Thank you, Judge Fain. On behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Ohio Center for Law-Related Education, I want to thank everyone who's here today for attending, and especially give a special thanks to the advisors and the teachers who have prepared the teams today, to the parents of the competitors, both those who argued today and those who argued in some of the earlier rounds. You're to be commended for encouraging your kids to participate in a program like the Ohio Mock Trial Program. We've seen a number of people who have gone through this program that have gone on to great things. I have an attorney who works for me who was a mock trial participant many years ago when the program was still a fledgling program, and she indicates that a lot of her experience and knowledge and expertise as being an attorney on a daily basis started when she was a mock trial participant. And lastly, the students who participated today, you guys, as everyone else has said, have really done a great job. I couldn't imagine getting up many years ago when I was a high school student and doing something like what you've done today. And I think that the activities that you've participated in the last few months, and I'm sure this is not your first year for some of you in the mock trial program, your activities in past years I think will stand you in good stead down the road. I do have the pleasure of announcing the Best Witness Award today. Unfortunately, we had a little snafu with the certificates, so those will be forthcoming as soon as we can dig those up. But our best witness today is Michelle Lipzig from Sylvania, South.
pleasure to recognize Judge Jackson, who will announce, after his remarks, the Outstanding Attorney Award.
Representing the Ohio State Bar Association, which is some 33,000 lawyers and paralegals and law students, I want to say that I was very impressed. I have spent 30 years as a trial lawyer, and I saw some techniques and some demeanor today that I don't always see in the courtroom. You all did a very good job. I also know your advisors, so I will give some credit to the advisors, the lawyers who helped you. But I think you handled a difficult subject. I would agree with the past comments. This is an important issue. This is an issue for which there's a great division and a great deal of comment. I think all the participants did an excellent job. It is my honor to announce the best attorney, and I will say that the counting was very close, but we do award the best attorney to Sandra Moon.
Thank you. I thought it would be appropriate to give you all now my canned speech on citizenship. It runs about 45 minutes, but then I decided that you might kill me. This is the third year that I've been privileged to be one of the judges of the final round competition, and I believed it was so terribly closer this year than any previous year. And when I added up my score sheet and saw that there was only 1 point separating the two teams, that was proof of that. But it is my honor to announce that the winner this year is Sylvania, Southview. That means that Marysville won second place, and that is an outstanding achievement in a contest of this sort. Now, we're going to do... Issue the award.
Such a wonderful job.
Now, if luck and hold on, Brad.